From the Youth Science Council, this is Good Question, a podcast about science in the UAE. I'm your host, Sada Shirbaji. Today we're talking to Matthew Karau, an electronics engineer and lecturer at York University Abu Dhabi who specializes in designing interactive systems. Mr. Karau studied electrical engineering and computer science at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. He has worked at interdisciplinary research organizations such as MIT Media Lab and has taught at universities across the world over the course of his career. Welcome to the show, Matt.
Thanks for having me.
Can you please start by giving an introduction about yourself and what you do?
Sure. My name is Matt Karau, and I'm working at NYU Abu Dhabi. I'm a lecturer of engineering and head of the Engineering Design Studio, which is a space that we've set up for supporting our students to take on really ambitious projects.
Interesting. Okay. So what kind of work do you do exactly?
So as an engineer, I've actually trained as an electrical engineer, but right now my work has, as an educator, shifted into teaching courses on topics not related to electrical engineering, but on subjects of
like what?
Social impact, of ethics, of design and innovation. And so topics that are tangentially related to engineering, but not directly engineering.
Okay. You would say are equally important.
For me, they're actually more important in some ways.
Important.
So those fundamental courses you can take, you can go online now, and they're wonderful ways to actually study these technical subjects. But when it comes down to discussion-based courses and courses where you actually need to get some sort of feedback from an authority or someone else who's actually in the field, these courses are actually invaluable.
Yeah. Do you think people are shedding enough light on these topics, or they're kind of undervalued in the academic world?
Well, I think right now we have a real, mix between influence from industry and academia, where especially topics around ethics and the kind of use of technologies that people would look at in science, technology, and society type studies courses. These subjects are coming really into the fore because of what's going on in Silicon Valley right now, what's going on with companies and our relationship to these really quickly developing technologies that we're starting to see coming into our lives faster than ever.
Okay. Well, to put things into perspective, can you talk about what is going on in Silicon Valley right now? How does that relate to your courses?
Yeah, definitely. So in Silicon Valley, I think we see a lot of desires of our students to head to Silicon Valley, which is again an inspiration to think, well, we should know what's going on there. And so,
okay, what is Silicon Valley for people who don't know?
So this is that wonderful place south of San Francisco where so many of the tech companies have started, and is the kind of magnetic draw for young people who want to start things in the tech sphere. And so with that, we have again so many young people then in this area of California that is really pushing for the next technology that will kind of see what could happen, and a lot of experiments happening there, which is great. But then actually what you have is a lot of people who experiment and have kind of followed this move fast and break things mentality that so many people have heard about, that again now we have cautionary tales because of that, where that actually didn't work as a way to develop technology responsibly. And so now we're actually seeing more and more of this responsible and kind of intentional design of technology.
Can you give an example what you mean by that?
Well, I mean, so on the negative side, you have too many examples, I think. So I don't know which one you want to choose, but
anything on the top of your head.
So obviously we have our friends in Facebook who have chosen different choices about privacy and the sharing of information that has brought many concerns broadly across not just the technological, but again, societal and really influencing so many spheres of our lives that we need to actually really pay attention to that. And we don't have any resolution currently of how to actually move forward with those things. And so that's an unsolved issue. And then, look at the positive side of things. You have people who've done what they call intentional growth in companies, which is actually they choose not to take VC venture capital money, where that venture capital money would be money that is very tied to the idea of accelerating your growth very quickly. And when you're accelerating your growth very quickly in a company, you're then at the kind of behest of your investors and others, ruthlessly moving forward as quickly as you possibly can. And so the alternative to that is this intentional growth where you grow at a rate that is sensible for your company, which then maybe gives you the time to look at those things that you might not have paid attention to as you were growing before.
So what kind of advantages does that bring about?
Well, I mean, it brings about the kind of reflection, the opportunity to reflect that doesn't happen in other companies, I think.
Okay. Yeah. Can we tie that to one of your courses, for example, ethics, ethics and engineering?
Definitely. So like one of the courses that I really love teaching is this engineering ethics course. And this is one that, again, started off years ago and probably to be honest, it started off as a way of fulfilling requirements for our accreditation, to be brutally honest. And it wasn't out of a passion for ethics that we started the course, but it became this very very clear indicator that, our students were going into the world with something more than just a kind of cursory preparation for understanding what their responsibilities would be as engineers. And so the greatest way I can kind of summarize what we do is we have students from all over the world coming to NYU in Abu Dhabi to study. They're coming from their home country. They're coming to a country that's probably not their home country to study at what is an American institution.
Yeah.
And likely after they graduate, they will work in a third or fourth country,
Yeah.
So how do you reconcile all of the things that are acting as, moral characters and acting ethically in the world according to your profession, which may have a set of ethical rules that you're supposed to abide by, according to your own personal ethics? And how do you actually combine all those things together? It's really one of the toughest things I've ever had to teach. When you really come down to it, there is no answer to a lot of these things. There are a set of compromises you have to make along the way where you need to be sure that you're on the kind of ethical track to doing the right thing in the world. And that kind of inspires our students to maybe look at things that maybe aren't that quick tech win. They're not looking to do that quick tech thing that just gets them out there and making money, but they're thinking about, how do I act as a moral actor in the world? And that's a way different conversation than, which technology are you using to launch your website? And that's something you don't necessarily expect to have from an undergraduate.
Wow, that's actually really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, the thing that comes to mind to me is this sort of stuff is usually restricted to ethicists, for example. You see philosophers talk about this stuff. You see the community, the social community address this stuff because it has implications that directly relate to them, whereas engineers are usually dissociated from this. How do you describe how an engineer could think about this meaningfully? How could you describe an engineer learning about, for example, how to do engineering ethically when they themselves usually don't identify as people who should be putting that kind of effort into their work? Probably, I don't know, I can imagine that they might be complaining about this. That they might say, well, this isn't really my job. This is someone who's in the humanities that you should be concentrating on this. Or someone who's incentivizing my work with whatever it is they want to purpose my work towards. Whereas, they want to get to the nitty gritty of it, right? Just the kind of the technical, the math, the engineering, the equations, and so on. So how do you describe, how would you respond to that kind of resistance? Or do you see that? Is it frequent, or is it just an intuition that it might be wrong?
No, I mean, I think it's a great intuition. I think there is that sense that, again, being engineers, that isn't your responsibility. But I think there's a sense of maybe revisiting or even hacking the idea of what an engineer is today, thinking about what our future engineer is going to be. When you look at the kind of tools and things they have, the kind of responsibilities they may have, ethics will be a piece of what a human in the engineering space will be doing. And there may be other actors in the engineering space that help us design things better. But as a human in engineering, you have this responsibility to actually understand these things. Or you need to be part of diverse teams where there is someone who is from an expert field sitting in on the project you're working on. But that's very rare, actually, to see that someone has designed an engineering firm who has an ethicist on board or has a, so you have a team of engineers who are like.
But that's really telling, isn't it? It's really telling. The fact that we don't have these kind of experts that are sitting there helping us guide this work, right?
Yeah, and that's the hope, is that you can then embed some of this desire to think about these things and not a kind of fear of thinking about these things because of the consequences. So many of ethics courses are taught through an engineering lens of, if you do something wrong, you're going to get put in jail because you did something that did not protect the interest of humanity.
Yeah.
And that's not the greatest way to approach this. If you approach it from a positive standpoint, to say, in fact, you will in fact make more impact in the world and better impact in the world, and you will do great things if you would actually consider these pieces of the equation.
Okay. So does this only, because I can see how this relates to technology, for example. I can think of direct parallels in medicine, how doctors, how ethics is really important to doctors. But, does this only relate to technology, or are there other areas in engineering? I mean, I'd love for you to actually, because we've been talking about this in a more abstract manner, maybe we can use somehow instantiate this and give some examples.
Yeah, definitely.
Of just give some examples of, both in like other areas of engineering and particularly technology to describe how ethics can be important.
Yeah, I mean, ethics comes up in a number of discussions for projects that our students work on. And so one of the, again, courses that I teach that goes beyond this engineering ethics, but ties to it in some way, is this Engineers for Social Impact course.
Yeah.
And in that course, we take our second-year students to work with an organization in Mumbai called URBS. And URBS is, their tagline is user-generated cities. And so the idea is they work with communities where they're informally recognized as a community, but don't necessarily have formal structures and recognition that cities and communities would have. And so our students go there and work with that community and people within the community to think about the ways that you can achieve interesting outcomes.
So like underprivileged communities?
Yeah. So in Mumbai, it's Dharavi. It's kind of a slum area, and it's really as a community, it's very vibrant, and it's one of these places where you hear the word slum and you think, oh my God, it's a slum, and you actually go there, and of course, no, it's actually this weirdly well-oiled machine that's running, where the individuals who live there also work there and have industry nearby and have a lot of things. There's obviously many challenges. It's not a utopia or anything like this.
But there's this, there's
like something about
cohesion.
The informality of it kind of takes them out of the conversation for so many pieces of what the rest of Mumbai appreciates as sort of structure and infrastructure. And our students then work with them to think, what other projects we could do together as young engineering students, working with people in the community who are the experts about their own community, right? They are the ones who know the most about where there's a pain point, where there's a point where we could actually work together. And now you're thinking, okay, what do we do as engineers? Where as ethical actors here, what's our responsibility to bring interesting solutions? What's our responsibility to make sure that those solutions are maintainable and make sure that they are actually something that isn't incentivizing odd behaviors, isn't actually disadvantaging or advantaging certain people in ways that we aren't aware. So we have to really think about those things. And one example is we're working with a community there of potters. And so they make in kilns that have been handmade from bricks. They put into actually in the middle of their living spaces, in between houses, they have these kilns, and they use old scrap fabrics to burn, to actually fire the kilns. Very polluting.
What's a kiln?
Kiln for making, so you take clay and you put it into an oven and you bake the oven. For them, it's around 24 hours to actually bake the clay and come out with pots at the end.
Wow, okay.
And so that's very polluting. And so our students had to think about, how do you actually work through this process with the community of what could we do? Because there's a reluctance to invest money to put in high-tech machinery there. So they've used these kilns for years and years and years.
Yeah, I can imagine.
So, you could walk in and parachute in some very high-tech solution from somewhere else in the world and say, there, halas, you're done. You have your technology. And
so that's not very sustainable?
It's not very sustainable. It requires some capital expenditures. I think this is a big conversation we have. It's like in the world of actually finding ethical solutions and good answers for not just those who have many resources, you look at ways to reduce these capital expenditures, because that's where certain people have big advantages because they have access to credit and bank accounts. Whereas, in the case of communities like this, they're working on kind of day-to-day, week-to-week sorts of cash flows. And so you can't tell them to spend X number of rupees to invest in a new kiln because they don't have access to that credit. And so how do you actually think with them ways to get better health outcomes, where you say, okay, what if we instead took not an engineering approach at all, but what if we sat with you and said, you could fire your kilns less often, which would result in less of this pollution in your community if you might, rebrand what you produce. If you're producing commodity goods right now, what if you would think about, producing goods that have a certain branding to them, where you sell them for a different price point? And you can actually now think about, okay, what if we target a different market with what we produce? Could we, in fact, make enough from each firing of the kiln that we don't fire it every week or every day? We fire it, every 2 weeks. And then we spend more time on the actual production of the goods. And that actually inadvertently, reduces the number of times that you're polluting your own community.
Okay.
Or what if you instead, shifted part of your business to education? So what if you actually didn't just do the production of commodity goods? What if you actually sat with some of the people in Mumbai who are actively looking for taking pottery courses and things like this? What if you sat with them and became that industry expert and shared your knowledge instead of producing for this commodity? And so you're thinking of other ways where you think around these solutions. And again, the ethics of how you actually do these things, and the ethics of how you are, knowing that you are part of a community and has a kind of history before you were there and will have a future after you leave. What does your action there actually look like? What was a good action? Is it a sort of a sensible action, and actually where does your role begin and end? And so it's those questions come up, and totally not engineering. It's really not engineering at some point. Okay. But that's what we want our engineers to come out with, is this sort of knowledge about how do you enter situations like that and think not just about the number of kilowatt hours used by the electricity of the kiln, or the number of BTUs of heat coming out of the kiln. That's a very engineering thought of how can we optimize that. How do we optimize actually the ecosystem? Thinking about the larger implications of what's going on here.
So obviously there must be then some kind of transfer of tools, right? A teaching process, because when we see this sort of stuff, where we see this kind of quote unquote like charitable behavior from usually countries that are affluent, and they go to quote unquote underdeveloped countries, and they help them with these sort of things. You see that they usually come in and leave. They kind of offer some short-term, temporary solutions, and they don't really leave by having educated the community there, so that they can empower them by giving them the tools necessary to sustain their own well-being, right? So a lot of times that can do a lot more damage than we think. And, it's usually kind of a spiritual experience for people, even, experts and technicians and so on. You go to an underdeveloped country, as a teacher, you kind of, you fill in for a little while, replaced by another teacher who has completely different expectations, teaching method, kind of maybe reteaches what you taught at an elementary level, and then leaves. And a lot of times the complaint here as well is, for example, in terms of building, right? So a lot of people, they pay good money to go and, participate in this charity where they build, for example, homes in countries for people they believe need these things. And then they leave. And then, I don't know enough about this or anything about this, but, sometimes I read people recommend that instead of doing this, we can empower the economy itself by giving people these jobs that they can build instead of us, where we're paying money so that we can, harm their economy, and not give them opportunity to participate, and not leave these kind of really important long-term tools with them that empowers them in the long run. What do you think about this? Do you agree?
No, I love that. I mean, I'm guilty of this too. But I mean, we ran another program for our first year students where we do exactly what you just described, and it doesn't leave me with a great feeling. It's
although it's supposed to, right?
I mean,
that's what it's for.
But we challenge our students. We say, look, this. Like, this is what's going on. This is the 100% 360 view of what's happening here. We are the most expensive labor to go and do these sorts of things where there is local labor that could do these things. And what does it mean to be doing that? And we have to cast it for our students to help them understand this isn't about the act of building. This is about you. We're investing in you. And like, it sounds bad, but we're investing in you as a student. And we know we're not investing in the community there. And this is how it sounds terrible, but that's the best we can say, is that we go to do these things to invest in our students so that they understand context like these, so that when they go out into the world, they're comfortable, and they're comfortable to enter situations like this and know that there's value to be shared, value to be created within communities. And it isn't by flying people in to build things for you. It's actually by, like you said, developing local technologies, local know-how, applying some of the actual regional knowledge, and actually building things in communities. And so we had a great conversation with another group we took to Ethiopia. There's a great community there in Rima, which is a hillside community. And again, most of the conversation there wasn't about building something or fixing something. It became very quickly contingency planning. How do you, as a community, plan for those unexpected things? We have let's say the privilege and the sort of freedom to spend our time and hire people as contingency planners and as kind of disaster planners. When you have a community that's living on the edge, that is a luxury you can't afford. And so that's something, if you come into a community, you have to be, I think, very aware of that too, that's part of your embedded responsibility, is to understand what happens when you leave and what happens when something breaks. We were there in this community in Rima, and what had happened was a group had come in before and had donated a very beautiful solar pump for their water. So the entire community had changed the way that they had a relationship with water. Previously, they carried jerry cans up and down a hill twice a day to get water, and the whole half of the day was spent doing that. And then the water pump came, and they had water directly in their community. So everything in the community then shifted to say, we don't have to spend our time doing these things anymore. And then the pump broke. And now everything that might have changed positively because of the water pump being there, all went on hold, whilst everyone went back to being a carrier of water. And so these things where you don't have these spare parts available in country and you don't have technicians available to service them, again, becomes that story of how you actually responsibly deploy technologies or responsibly share knowledge about technologies to others. And again, it doesn't have to be in a least developed country or something like this. It can be anywhere in communities that just haven't seen this technology before, haven't used this technology before. So another example is we actually run a space here on our campus called the Engineering Design Studio. And again, we share through tours and sort of stories about the place, all the great things that we're able to achieve with our students. And we've had relationships where we've had universities from Ghana come over and say, oh, we really want to create a similar space for our students. And, the story we tell them is, great, awesome. The thing is, you can beat us at this game. This game isn't fixed in stone, actually. You're seeing what is a university with many resources who has laid out capital expenditures, which, these capital expenditures, you throw, large sums of money at machines and build rooms full of capabilities. But in fact, that's not how the real world works. Very, very rarely are you surrounded in, within 1 square kilometer with the exact technologies you always need to make the things you need. What we are universally connected to is this global and ever interconnected group of people around the world who can help you produce things and make things. And so this idea of actually locally producing things pushes you to think about, we should fill a room full of technology with many expensive tools. But when in fact what you need to do is invest in the individuals. You need to actually look at the individuals and say, you have a great idea and we don't need to make it here. I love your idea. What we need to do is get you in touch with the right people. And you can be just as good in Ghana at making things as anyone and anywhere else in the world because of this interconnected world we live in. So leveraging that means all of these barriers start to disappear. So instead of encouraging people around the world to reproduce these rooms full of equipment, what we should do is encourage people to think about ways to empower individuals who have interesting projects and invest in them and invest in their process, because that's actually where, if you're sitting in Accra, you can beat us. We don't do enough of that here on our own campus. You can do it better than we can do it, and for no money. And that's the crazy thing that really gets me inspired to think about what we can do in environments like this.
Yeah. Wow, that's really amazing. I hope I didn't bully you into this response. So can you tell me more about your personal background and whether your childhood has inspired your career path today?
Yeah, definitely. So my childhood was one of these where I grew up in the Midwest in the US, and this is a classic area that is the flyover country. And so this is Indiana and Michigan is my kind of stomping grounds. And those places for me were connected to the automotive industry because my father was working at General Motors for some part of his career and then at Delphi. And so this influence and also kind of the surrounding technology that's associated with this automotive industry, strangely then, or not strangely, led me to engineering as a career path. And so my family has, in it right now 4 engineers. And so it's probably not a coincidence that I chose engineering. And so there is that sort of predisposition to choosing engineering, conditioning. So I grew up doing a lot of those things that, again, you in the 1980s and 90s would do, playing with Apple II computers. Back in the day, you would have these magazines of computer coding, and then at the back there would be some code that you had to copy and type in, and that would be a program. So that was how they distributed code, was through magazines. And using that as ways to get into hacking around with things, and then of course taking things apart and putting them back together sometimes, and then a whole hobby related to remote controlled cars where you get so deeply into these things. So getting those kind of obsessive hobbies led me to this point of realizing there was a good chance that I would study engineering.
Okay. Where did you go next from Michigan?
Yeah, so from Michigan, there was that trek eastward to Boston, where I was in MIT for 4 years as undergrad. And so that was my introduction to one of the kind of favorite places on earth that I have so that trek eastward to MIT was one of those where it was an introduction to one of these places that when I set foot first on the campus for the candidate weekend, it was one of those moments of a light went off and said, this is the place where I've got to be. So I had applied to a number of other schools for engineering, but, my father said when he saw me look at the campus for the first time, he knew that there was going to be some financial implications to this. So, the idea of MIT for me was something I didn't know anything about. So it was really on a whim I applied, thinking, what a cool place. I had seen a video of this robotics competition that they do as part of a physics class in high school. And afterwards, I just asked, my teacher to say, what place was that where that happened? And that was what led to me applying to MIT. And so MIT was a great experience, of course, and some interesting times in the 1990s to be there when there was really a lot of investment, especially in the place that I spent a lot of time, which was the MIT Media Lab. And during those times, it was really, hundreds of companies came in sponsoring research in this kind of weird little pocket of MIT. And they were doing some really experimental things. And so I had an opportunity to work on holography. I had an opportunity to work on designing and working on
What's holography?
Making holograms.
Okay.
So like the actual act of shining lasers at glass and recording diffraction patterns in there that represents an object and then shining them with a laser to replay that light. And so it's really, again, that technique is an old one, but we were working on ways of doing that digitally. So you actually record digital information in a hologram as opposed to the analog photography that we would kind of call the early days of holography. Then I worked on a kind of experiment that was heading to the top of Everest for monitoring the hikers' physiological signals. And then I had a chance to work on a really random hardware interface where you had blocks of pegs moving in and out of a block as a way of communicating over a distance. So again, really experimental things that, again, as an undergraduate or just as an engineer especially, just too intriguing to not work on.
Yeah, that's amazing. Can't believe you had that kind of experience as an undergraduate. Does not compare to mine. But yeah, so after MIT, where did you head?
So then I actually stayed within the family. I went with, there was a opportunity for me to stay in the US, and then there was a strange opportunity to move to Ireland, and a place I'd never been, but it was within the Media Lab family. They were starting the Media Lab Europe there in Dublin, and so I went there and was one of the early team members helping set up the place, and we were there in collaboration with the Irish government, again, trying to recreate that magic of what happens at the MIT Media Lab, but in Europe, and pulling from all different countries in Europe, these creative individuals and these kind of interdisciplinary teams looking at things. Again, I jumped onto a team that was called the Everyday Learning Group, who was doing learning research. How do young people actually, build understandings about things using, constructivist views of the mind. And so it's just really like things that I had nothing in my history relating to, but got so deep into it and became so interesting for me as an engineer, bringing some technical know-how to this equation, but then also having to become really, deeply ingrained in the text and the references of that community as well.
Wow, that's really amazing. Looks like you've been around. And that's probably, there's more countries that you've been to and worked in?
Yeah, and so after that nice time in Ireland, I actually moved to work with a team in Scotland for a short time, and then spent a big chunk of time in Berlin. So I was working at the University of the Arts in Berlin. So I think before that time, I kind of viewed myself as an engineer, kind of doing engineering things. And then I actually moved to this role where I was an engineer bringing engineering thinking to a design program. And so there's a program there in the university that is looking at ways that designers and artists use digital technologies and how do they make use of them in nice ways. So I was actually part-time working as an engineer, but then part-time teaching as well. And so for me, that was a moment of bringing this sort of engineering mindset to a design program. And that led to me coming here to NYU Abu Dhabi and actually blending that together and actually saying, maybe I'm also a bit of the ambassador to design, bringing that to an engineering program too. So I'm not a designer by training or by any sort of claims, but being in that environment and having worked with people who look at problems differently, I'm able to then sit with my students here and not just talk about the simple technical problems you're trying to solve, but talk about why, when we look at the challenges we're facing and the ambitions we have, why are there better ways to solve problems than others?
Wow, that's really phenomenal history there. Can you tell me more about your current projects?
Yeah, so here at NYU Abu Dhabi, I've been working with students. Again, I came here back in 2010 for the first time, but really kicked off my full-time engagement with the university in 2013. And since then, we've, with students, done some amazing things. And so I take very little credit for what they've done, but I take credit for, removing roadblocks for them is the main thing I do. And so they're the ones that come with these great ideas. And, being in the country we're in right now, like there's no place else on earth where students are invited to do these kinds of things. I think if you say, my undergraduate might have been interesting, but if you look at what these students are invited to do by being residents of the UAE, they're invited to engage with space. They're invited to engage with government. They're invited to engage with urban planning, energy, all these things, and do very concrete projects. And so one of the early projects we worked on was a group of students designing for wildlife conservation. They designed a drone application for wildlife conservation in Fujairah. And so they were, assessing all the possible ways. They were actually first looking at drones technology. What are all the possible ways you could do drones for good? This was a competition set up in Dubai, Drones for Good. And they did all this sort of surveying of understanding what could you do with drones. And of course, engineers would say, let's deliver pizzas. Let's, make the ticketing work faster for speeding tickets, or let's do some very technical thing with drones. And they somehow, through investigating the idea that everyone else is already doing that, and we as undergraduates have some other kind of superpower, which isn't to compete with the industry on these topics, but we have the superpower of paying attention to things that are not necessarily immediately market ready. And so they identified that this public service of doing conservation in the UAE was one where they could actually apply their thinking and develop this technology of monitoring wildlife areas in Fujairah. They then, for kind of that competition, what they did is presented this as a technology that could be used more broadly. They won the competition and now actually have a company in San Francisco doing this as a full-time thing.
That's really amazing.
And so, again, inspired by these calls for proposals that address the challenges that are faced here in the region, we see our students really stepping up and doing things that are, pretty amazing. And so another one recently that came up was our students across a span of 3 years was, a team of students across the span of 3 years, they were looking at ways of designing solar-powered houses. And so this is something, again, in the region, looking at the construction techniques we use, looking at the energy production and storage techniques we use, looking at ways for water conservation, looking at ways that we grow our food. These weren't the topics that the kind of call for proposals put in there, but those are the topics that our students put in there because of the ways that they've been exposed to the challenges and the sort of ambitions of the UAE. And so they then built this really nice concept and then eventually built a house that was fully solar powered, using energy storage. So you actually have kind of balancing of energy throughout the day, using innovative techniques for growing food inside, ways of actually harvesting water from the atmosphere, doing atmospheric water generation. And, at the end, presenting was a very concise and clear picture of what they could imagine a future type of building in the UAE might look like.
Wow, that's really amazing. I have more questions for you, but I'm trying to just see which I can give priority here. I have two that I would love for you to answer. So the first one is I'm really curious from what you said about the difference between technology in 1990s and today. How would you describe the difference?
Well, so that's a really interesting question. So for me, a lot of the big leaps that have happened include having access to technology. So there was technology in the 90s that could do a lot of what we do today, but it was just not widely distributed. And so we have now access to so many things in terms of software that students and young people and adults can make use of that gets them going without needing to make a phone call to purchase a compact disc to be shipped to you. And, in terms of hardware.
No more floppy disks.
No more floppy disks, no more coasters of America Online CDs. So this way of distributing information as well, like the idea that information is available so that not only the tools you use, but in fact the access to the information that you're using to choose what to work on is better. It's not good still, it's better. So I think there's still a huge issue of we sit in universities thinking everything's okay because we have access to these beautiful online resources. But in fact, if you step outside of the environment of the university and think, what does the rest of the world have access to? They have access to tweets, news articles, popular information. But if you go searching for an academic paper about a current topic,
it's $30.
You'll be met with $30 to $75 bill, right? And so who chooses to pay for information that's part of the problem we have right now in terms of like those tools are out there, the distribution networks are there, but we still haven't figured out great ways to ensure that humanity is collectively having access and getting smarter. So in terms of hardware tools too, I think there's another big thing, like the ways that we make things and produce things, those tools are getting better and better and better. And the greatest thing I'm seeing right now is that we are moving to a point where that is being, removed from the individual's responsibility and actually moved to a sort of collective cloud production where you say we've moved a lot of our services of technology into the cloud. Now you can think about moving a lot of these physical things we would do into a kind of abstraction where we don't anymore necessarily need to dictate which particular tool was used to make this or which particular technology was used to make this, but we think together as humanity and think together as engineers of ways that we can make things, and then we send those to external production. And this is an interesting question that brings up what is the role of engineers in the future as well. So this is something we always have conversations about with our students. And, in the realm of everyone looking at artificial intelligence these days, the kind of proposition I say to our students is I propose to them, as a student of engineering, there will be tools in the future that will support engineering thinking and engineering design.
Yeah.
How do you as an engineer engage with them? You either become really good at making those tools and you're a producer of new tools that use that technology, or you're really good at using those tools, or you're going to be replaced by those tools. Because at the end of the day, there's a lot coming, and it's building ahead of steam that actually, we aren't going to be making those, calculator decisions. We're not going to be hand calculating things like we used to. Even in the 90s, people were doing much more of this human computer, humans as computers, basically. And that is something that's coming that we're going to have to get used to, the idea that there is an element of that engineering process where a human needs to be there. And there's a part of it that human isn't the best at doing. And so we need to think of ways that we embrace that and think of ways we use that to our advantage, actually.
Wow. Yeah, well, there's obviously a collective fear with respect to being replaced by machines. People are scared that obviously that they're going to go redundant. But, many people are saying that could just leave some space for leisure and thinking in the humanities and arts and poetry and, and aesthetics maybe. But that's a whole other conversation.
Yeah, I would love to believe that was true. I have a hard time just given history in the way that every time there's a great book called More Work for Mother. And it's again this, in the 80s, it's the concept of all the home economics technologies that are coming out to make life easier, in fact, only made the home life more complicated.
Oh, really?
And so it's again, we have great examples in history of promises of more leisure time because of technologies.
Yeah.
And I'd rather have the serious conversation about what if we didn't translate it into leisure time? What else could we translate it into that still makes us feel okay about the fact that certain tasks we do right now, we won't be doing in the future?
Wow, that's really interesting. Obviously, there's a lot of anxiety associated with any kind of innovative development over time. There's some really great literature on this and some great excerpts that I've read in the past from newspapers, like people being scared of, bicycles, umbrellas, and Walkman, all sorts of really trivial things today that we take for granted. But then when you see these developments historically, you see there's a kind of a global panic. Every time something comes out, people are usually treated with a pessimistic attitude. And then it takes a couple of generations for them to get used to it. And then, their, progeny, their kids in the future basically look at it as though it's, a clock on the wall. It's this trivial thing that we incorporate into our life on a daily basis, but don't really think about in the way people thought about in the past. And I can see this happening with the wheel, the pen, any kind of, what could be called technology at any time, kind of books, I think. Books, people people panicked about that. So that's a kind of anxiety that's usually coupled with these kind of innovation. Maybe there's sometimes it's a warranted anxiety, like maybe nuclear technology. We can freak out about that with good reason, but not necessarily some of the stuff that's being talked about today, especially with regards to like artificial intelligence. Okay, so I don't want to wrap the episode because it's really been an interesting discussion. But if you were to give some reading recommendations for people who want to go into your discipline, what sort of things would you recommend? What sort of readings would you recommend to them? People listening to the episode.
Yeah, that's a good question. So given that my discipline is transdisciplinary somehow, I have a large list of reading that I've compiled for our students. And actually, I can highly recommend checking out our library online. I can send you the link to it, where we have actually a lot of these books there relating to design, architecture, again, entrepreneurship, innovation. These are topics that, have so many good examples that it's hard to pin down one or two. There's always the kind of head of the list that's constantly the newest ones coming out are so interesting to read. I think these new accounts of old stories are great. I love a lot of the space that BBC did back in the 1970s. There's a TV show actually called Connections, which is great, really, really old school style view again of the way that there is this constant chain of connectivity between the humans and the society and the technologies that they use. And so I love also the list of TV shows and movies that we've put together for our students. So I'll share that with you as well as a way that we think that future engineers can actually find good answers in the world.
Wow. Okay. So for listeners, we'll be including links to these references on our website and social media. If you're interested, you know where to look. Thank you so much for your time. If we want to get in touch with you, listeners on the show, if they want to get in touch with you, how would they go about doing that?
The best way is actually to follow our lab social media. So it's at NYUAD.io.
Okay.
And there'll be a link to that.
Okay. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks so much.
That was Matthew Karau, an electronics engineer and lecturer at York University Abu Dhabi. To listen to more episodes, you can find Good Question on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you have any questions, comments, or suggestions for what you'd like to see from us next, you can reach us at GoodQuestionUAE on Instagram and Twitter, or email us at info@goodquestion.ae. Good Question is a production of the Youth Science Council and the Office of Advanced Sciences in the United Arab Emirates, produced and directed by Hind Al-Ali and Hayat Al-Hassan. Sound design by Gareth Chen. Saad Al-Ali is our editor. Hamad Al-Mansouri is our digital media coordinator. And I'm Sada Shilbaji.